welcome to Some of Our Parts, the podcast where two friends talk about the movies that add up to make us who we are. I'm Lindsay,
And I'm Jim.
and we are still in Black History Month, which is something that we here on this podcast continue to recognize because, history is a thing,
It, it's
and
it's real.
it's real. It happened. All the stuff happened.
So, Lindsay, what did you pick for us this week?
So I went back to the 90s, as I always do. And I picked a movie that aired actually on television. When I was a kid, there was something called The Wonderful World of Disney, where they would air either a Disney movie or like a new TV movie, like every Sunday on ABC. And usually I would watch it with my family. And one time they produced a new TV movie based on historical events called Ruby Bridges, about Ruby Bridges. That's what I picked. It came out in early 1998. So I was seven, just shy of turning eight. I was in second grade at the time. It's one that I really enjoyed as a kid. Even after watching it on TV, they then made it available like at Blockbuster. So I would rent it like over and over and watch it over and over again. Because obviously, Ruby Bridges was a child. She was in first grade and I was in second grade. So it felt very like wow, that like a little girl was dealing with this stuff. So
Now,
it's one that stood out to me.
so you saw it when it first came on TV in 1998, and I have to
Hmm.
say, I'd be honest, I did not know of this movie and did not know who the subject matter was until you brought it up and brought it to my attention. So we'll talk about later in our discussion about if people aren't aware who it is, how they probably have seen this person and just don't
Hmm.
realize it. So, like I did. So,
Yes.
but yeah, thank you for introducing me to this. And it did seem after I watched it, when you said it was a TV movie, I remember when they made movies for TV, and you could tell the
Hmm.
production value was a little bit different from the theatrical. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but
It's
good
very after school
cast.
special like kind of vibe.
Yeah, so maybe one camera. I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
maybe two, but a good cast,
Hmm.
and I think all the people that were in the movie, particularly the title role, she did a very very good job, and
Yeah.
it was interesting, and or you saw it when it was on, and you were close to the little girl's age, so I'm sure it did make a big impact on you.
For sure. So for people who don't know, Ruby Bridges, a real person, she's currently 70 years old. So like this is not remote history. She was one of the first kids to desegregate schools in New Orleans in 1960. It was her and like three or four other little girls, but it ended up that like the other girls went to a different all white school and she went to William France Elementary and she was the only black girl. And as Jim alluded to, I'm sure if you haven't heard of her name directly, you have seen there's a Norman Rockwell painting called The Problem We All Live With that shows a little black girl being escorted by federal marshals. And you can see that there's like graffiti on the wall and tomatoes have been thrown and stuff like that. So that is Ruby Bridges. That little
Mhm.
girl is Ruby Bridges. So this movie is a depiction of the real events that happened. And I think based on like what Jim and I were talking about this before we started recording, but it's actually a pretty accurate rendering of what actually happened, what unfolded throughout that time that she was the first like black kid at this school. And then, how that impacted her and her family and the school and the community. And I think being approximately the same age as her and watching it at the time, it was just so like striking that like I don't know, right? Like I just like went to school, right? Yeah, I just got
Mhm.
on the bus and I went to school and it was fine. But like this little girl is being escorted by federal marshals through an angry mob of white adults screaming at her, spitting, threatening, and we'll get more into those details like as we talk about it. And like she didn't get it, right? Because she was like 6. She's just like, I'm just going to school. Like,
Yeah. Um,
And the idea of like that happening as a child and like watching this movie as a child, it was just like, again, so hard for me to like wrap my mind around. And I said to you, Jim, one of the images that sticks with me the most, and this is something that really happened, and we'll talk about it when we get there, but there was like an old white woman as Ruby's walking by. She has like a little coffin with a black baby doll in it. And like that's the part that I always remembered from when I watched it when I was a kid. And it's like, and I think we talked about this in the past movies we talked about. It's just like, it is so hard for me to wrap my mind around that level of like anger and hatred toward a child.
yeah, a little girl who had done nothing to anybody, who couldn't have done anything to anybody,
Right.
other than the fact that she was just there.
Yeah.
And then
She's just there and she's black. And
yeah,
like
yeah, for her to be the target of such hate and such, just yeah, just evil thoughts and so on, and like,
violent threats.
hmm
Like,
I can't even imagine what it would be like, to be, your age, to be that age, and then to watch that, and to see a little girl like that, and then you think, why don't they like her, or what is,
hmm
why is all this being directed at her? But then, if you think, like, when I watched the movie, to think about what she must have been thinking,
hmm
through all
hmm
this. And the movie does, well, we'll get into it, explores a little bit about, well, maybe more than a little bit about what she felt, and what her family felt and so on.
Yeah, it's just wild. And I did like, I have a lot of questions watching this. Like, I asked my parents a lot of questions about it because it doesn't like make sense, right? And you see in the movie, Ruby asks questions too, because she's just like,
Yeah.
I didn't do anything to these people. Like, why are they so mad? It also makes me sad now because there are lots of people that like would never, that like want this kind of stuff to not be taught to their kids, right? They like
Oh,
don't
you
want.
you mean this piece
hmm
of history? Yeah.
Yes, like this is the kind of like books that people do not want taught in school.
Hmm.
And it's such like a missed opportunity. Because here's the thing. Is it going to make your kid feel bad or upset? Probably. I don't think that's a bad thing. Here's the thing. If Ruby Bridges at age 6 could deal with this being her everyday reality, I think that your kid can suffer through hearing about it. Yeah, I mean, like read a children's book about it.
Right. Or
Watch a movie
watch
like
the
this
watch
about
the
it.
TV movie about it. So it's
And have a conversation with your kid. I think some of the problems that people have, well, one, some people see themselves in that angry mob of people and they don't want to deal with that. But like I think it's history. It happened. Like this literally happened. The person it happened to is still you can go see her speak. Like she's very much like alive and kicking, like doing stuff. So the idea that like we can't talk about this or even like learn about it, watch a movie about it, read a book about it is just like you're doing such a disservice. And it's, like cliche, but like those who don't like learn history will be doomed to repeat it. And it does feel like that's sort of where we're at, right? Like if you're gonna every time you see like a black person with a job, if you're gonna scream that that's like a DEI thing, because obviously black people are not qualified to go to the same schools as white people. Like there's a moment in this movie where Ruby Bridges has gotten really good test scores, and the like head teacher or whatever is like, oh well, that's too high, so I'm lowering them.
yeah, just arbitrarily.
Yeah. She's like, no,
Mhm.
no, no, that's too high.
Yeah.
And it's like,
And
no, she's actually just really smart. That's why she's here.
right,
Like,
yeah, she just, and she talks about how the Ruby got special treatment and education because, yeah, she was the only one. She only had, she was the only one in the class. Well, that wasn't her choice. That was,
right.
yeah, that was because nobody else wanted to be in the class. But
Right.
but
And
the
that had
teacher
as
said,
many,
yeah, she did all the work. She did
yeah.
the work.
And I would imagine no one wanting to be in class with you. Certainly you get one-on-one attention from the teacher, but also lots of negatives to that, as we see also
Right.
that Ruby
Yeah.
experienced. Like she
Hmm.
knows that no one wants to be in class with her. You don't think that's
Right.
like, but that they don't like think of her as like a child. They think of her as like a black person. Like they think of her
Mhm. Right. Or just the
as
threat of black people.
right. Like they don't
Yeah.
even think of her as like a human child.
That's what I was. Yeah, I was good. It's not even they acknowledging that it's a 6-year-old girl.
Hmm.
It's oh, this is going to this event or this thing is going to it's upsetting our our system. You know.
Hmm. Hmm. It's like, yeah, it's people just like talk to your kids.
Yeah.
And if you're not comfortable talking to your kids, then you got to figure out your own stuff
Right.
and then talk to your kids.
Or at least allow then if you don't want to talk to them about it, at least allow it to be taught in school so
Right.
a teacher can teach it
E-
to them.
exactly.
It's
Exactly.
a part of not only history but our history, the
Exactly.
American people's history. So for better or for worse, it's
Hmm.
it's our history. So
Yeah. Like,
we have good parts, we have bad parts, and we
right.
should learn both parts.
Hmm. And I think none of what, like, the way things are now cannot be understood without understanding history,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Like, I think some of the stuff that we deal with today is still related to the stuff that we talked about in Glory, right? It's still related to like
Hmm.
Reconstruction. People have been fighting back against that since it happened. Since Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation, people have still been mad about that, right? And
Yeah.
then desegregating schools. There are people that have been fighting to resegregate schools since Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. So, like, and those things lead to where we are now. That's why there are things about like school vouchers and school choice. It is so you can send your kids to private schools that can discriminate. Like
Yeah.
that is the point of them. That's why homeschooling became a big thing because white people pulled their kids out of
Mhm.
integrated schools. Like we can't understand where we are now without like
It's
understanding these things. And
but
maybe that's part of the reason why people don't want to talk about history because they want people to uncritically accept where we are now.
right.
And that's just not for me.
No. We have to see how we got where we are. We have to see where that path, how that path started, and how we got onto that path, and where the path led us to. So, so it,
Exactly.
yeah, you have to understand the journey to understand the destination. You know, gee,
Exactly.
how did we get here? Well, here we'll show you. This is how this. So, uh, and
Hmm.
before anyone says anything, I didn't go to private school, and I was not homeschooled. I went to a
Yes.
good old public school in West
Public
Virginia.
education.
That's right.
Hey.
It works. So even in West Virginia, it works.
There you go. I went to public schools in Maryland, which are among the best in the country. So,
Mine weren't, but hey,
yeah,
I
look where
learned
we are.
I learned to read really good,
Reading, writing, and arithmetic.
arithmetic. So 3 R's. So
Yes. So,
anyway,
yeah, so just before we get into the movie, it's directed by Yujan Palsy, she's a director from the island of Martinique. She hasn't really done anything else that I had heard of. She does more like documentaries now, and she did this TV movie, but for like real film buffs, maybe you've heard of some of these things. Sugarcane Alley, A Dry White Season, Simeon. I think she's won some like prizes at film festivals, but they're
oh,
just not
okay.
like big commercial ones. The movie is written by Tony Ann Johnson, who's a screenwriter, also short story author, playwright. She's also in the movie. She plays Alma Broyard, who's the wife of the NAACP guy.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so
Okay, all right.
well, I was looking her up as the writer, and I was like, wait, she looks familiar. And
No,
then I looked at the
okay.
cast list, and I was like, oh, she also is in it. The only thing that she's written that I've heard of is the sequel to the movie Step Up. She wrote Step Up 2, The Streets,
Ooh, ooh, and what a catchy title that is.
right? So, the movie, the title card lets us know it's 1960 and we're in New Orleans, Louisiana. So, Ruby's mom, Ruby Bridges' mother, her name was Lucielle Bridges. She learns from Dr. Broyard from the local NAACP that she outscored most of the other first graders in the district. Like, and based on from what he says, it sounds like first graders of all colors.
Yeah, I got that too, that it wasn't just of black children. So And then, and for some reason, when he said district, I thought Louisiana was broken up into parishes, but I don't know.
Yeah, I guess he
So,
means like the school district, and then instead of counties, they have
oh,
parishes.
parishes. Okay.
Ruby's mom, Lucille Bridges, is played by Layla Roshan, who she was kind of very big, I think, in all the like Black 90s movies. She was in like Waiting to Exhale, Boomerang, Harlem
Oh,
Nights.
I thought she looked familiar. So
She was in
like,
Any Given Sunday. So she's, I think, especially like this period of time, like in the 90s, very,
okay.
very ubiquitous. Um, Dr. Boyard is not. I think he's more of a voiceover person, which you can tell when you listen to him. The actor's name is Peter Francis James. He has a very nice like baritone voice, so
Hmm.
he's done a lot of voiceover work. He also, if you're an SVU head like me, he's been a judge for several episodes on Law and Order SVU. Of course, you have to have that
I
nice
was
deep.
worried there was somebody in this movie that had not been in an SVU
There are so
episode.
many of them. I have a list.
Okay, all right. Boy, I was man. I don't know about the
There are at
rest of
least
our
three
audience,
other
but
people that I
I was
know
concerned.
off the top of my head. Didn't even
Okay,
need to look it up. Okay?
perfect. Okay, all right. Our streak is unbroken.
Exactly. Exactly. We get a little slice of life in their neighborhood. Ruby is playing baseball with the neighborhood kids. She and her dad go to the local grocery store, which is owned by what appears to be like a Jewish like immigrant woman,
Hmm.
Stein's Grocery, and they have a very friendly relationship. And then we get the news that Ruby, along with four other girls, have been picked to be the first Black students to integrate some of the local all white schools based on their test scores, right? So it's like there is no like argument against them, right? Like they're obviously like very smart. And, we learned separate but equal is not equal.
Yeah.
We learned that in Brown versus the Board. So the governor of Louisiana is against it, as many of the southern governors were, right? You think of like
Wallace.
Wallace, the southern governors were pushing back against federal mandates for integration.
Yeah.
They're thinking about doing it, and Lucielle, Ruby's mom, is very much for her going.
And this was but this was a federal law, correct?
Yes,
To integrate the schools, if I right. So it
yes,
wasn't a state law. It wasn't. This was federal. So gotcha.
yes. So this like it came from the enforcement of Brown versus the Board of Education
Right.
that
Okay.
schools had to be integrated. Um, and the dad, uh, his name's Aben Bridges.
Wasn't sure.
Uh, he's played by the actor Michael Beach. He's another person that I think is in a lot of stuff, especially around this time.
Hmm.
Um, he was in Lean on Me, also in Waiting to Exhale. He was in Soul Food. More recently, he's been in If Beale Street Could Talk. On TV, he was on ER. He was Jeannie Boulet's husband, Al. He was also on the show Third Watch. He's been on Sons of Anarchy, also on an episode of SVU.
Okay.
So, anyways, the dad, Abin Bridges, like he was worried about her going, but the mom is like, she has earned this place. She deserves it. And this could make things better, not just for her, not just for the rest of our children, but for all Black children. She says colored children, but I'm
Yeah,
saying
but
Black
it's
children.
well the yeah
That was the language of the time.
the jargon of the time,
Yes.
exactly. So, and it was well, it was accepted by that was the common usage.
Hmm. Yes. So they go to church, and the pastor is preaching about them being kind of a people under fire, which I think sort of underscores the mom's message, right? That like,
Hmm.
this is something we have to kind of fight against. And then the next day it's time for her to go to school, and things are crazy like immediately. The police are setting up like a roadblock on their street, which like the dad encounters when he's going to work. They're like, "Oh, do you live on this street? Do you have ID?" And the dad's like, yeah." And they're like, "Okay, well, like you're fine now, but like you're probably gonna need it when you come back later." Because they're setting up like literal roadblocks.
Right.
And then the U.S. Marshals arrive to escort Ruby and her mom to school, which again it's William France Elementary School. Um, and Ruby's like, "Who are these big men?" Her mom's like, "They're just gonna help us like get to school. Don't worry about it." And Ruby's like watching this unfold just like open mouthed because they're like driving. They have a police escort. There are crowds outside of the school. And what's interesting is like if you read what the real Ruby Bridges has said, she actually didn't realize it was like a problem at first. Like because she's used to being in New Orleans, Mardi Gras, right? And
Hmm.
Mardi Gras, there's crowds of people yelling and screaming and throwing stuff, right? So like in her head, like that's what this was. And eventually, she came to know kind of what was really going on. But
Oh, okay.
initially, like, and I guess that makes sense, right? If you're a little kid, you're like, oh, okay, I live in New Orleans. When there's a big crowd of people screaming and yelling, it's a party.
And throwing things right.
It's Mardi Gras.
It's happy time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So when they get there, they stop. The US Marshal turns around and tells Ruby, like, you're gonna stay in between us. There's gonna be two of us in front of you, two of us behind you. You do not look back. You just look straight ahead and walk.
mhm.
And to her credit, she does that. Which, like, for a 6-year-old is remarkable focus, because I don't think I could have done that.
I was even watching and knowing it was a movie and stuff, but I mean the actress that played Ruby and everything, but yeah, her face was very stoic. It was showed no emotion, no
Hmm.
fear, no anger, no sadness, no or even curiosity. It was just like she was laser focused on getting to that door, getting into that building. So,
Yeah. And quotes from the marshals that escorted her basically say that that's how it was.
mm,
She showed a lot of courage. She never cried. She didn't whimper. She just marched along like a little soldier, and we're all very, very proud of her, which sounds nice. And the marshals in the movie are nice to her, so hopefully that sounds like maybe that was the dynamic in real life too, which is good. And there's this crowd of people, they're screaming, they're chanting, they're swarming them.
mm.
2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. And that's like the nicest. This is like they're starting mild. It gets worse like
Well,
every day.
I wonder to think that if this had not been a TV movie, if it had been a theatrical release movie, would some of the language been a lot stronger? That
Yeah.
as I'm sure it was in real life.
Oh yeah.
But I'm sure because back then on TV you couldn't say
Yeah.
the
They
seven
did say
day
the N word though.
they did, which but they they didn't say that you couldn't say the seven curse words,
Yeah,
cuss
yeah,
words
yeah.
like
George Carlin.
George Carlin talked about. You couldn't use those.
They get to the front door and the local police try to stop them. They're like, the governor of the great state of Louisiana says you can't come in here. And the US Marshal says, well, the president of the United States says that I can. And
I
then
love
the
that part where he pulls out the I guess it's the official order or whatever, yeah, and
hmm
the it's I guess it's the state police, it's like,
yeah,
oh well, the governor says,
the
we
governor says you can't come in here. And the
yeah,
marshal's like, okay, I don't know if you've heard of a man named Dwight Eisenhower, but he
yeah,
says I can.
yeah.
So,
He says we're going in, so
and they step aside and go in.
suck on that, buddy.
And even then, she still doesn't look back. And like, as soon as they walk in, there are like all the teachers in there, which are all white women. They like gasp
Oh,
as if they've never seen a black person before. Like, it's just like, oh,
it's like Rosemary's Baby showed up. It's like,
right.
all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what is this? It's
It's
this,
just
what
like a
is,
little black girl who looked like cute as hell, first of all.
I,
She's got her little, like, the bows and the frilly
oh,
socks and the
oh, she's,
dress, and
yeah,
like,
she's very cute and very,
mhm.
like, just so nice. I was going to say all dressed up. It's like she's
And
going
she's
to
very,
Sunday
like, pleasant
school.
and friendly. Yeah.
Yeah. She's got this cute smile.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So,
it's like, yeah, no, it's like, all of a sudden it's like, the Antichrist walked into the school, and
right. And then some parents like immediately are busting in, yanking, like physically dragging their kids out because they're like, my kid's not going to school with her, one of them.
Mhm, mhm. You're
Um,
coming with me.
yeah. And also
Oops.
it seems like this is the first time that Ruby and her mom learned that the other girls are not coming to this school. So
Yeah,
all the other girls that are integrating all went together to the other school. So
right.
Ruby is flying solo here.
I know poor Ruby has to tough it out all alone. So
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
So
damn.
yeah,
Um,
thanks, fellas. For whoever made that plan.
right. Dr. Boyard, like, you couldn't give
Hmm.
us a heads up here. Come on,
Right. Yeah. Or
NAACP.
couldn't you had four? You couldn't go two and two. You had to.
Right.
It's like really, come on.
Also, at the same time, a new teacher shows up here, Barbara Henry. She's just moved to the area from Boston. She's also another white lady, but they're like, we're busy. Come back tomorrow. Um, the administrator, Miss Woodmere, is the one here in charge. They like refer to the principal, but they never like show a principal, so it's a little bit confusing about what the
Yeah, it
roles
is.
are.
Because I thought she was the principal, but I guess she
Hmm.
wasn't. So, but I did write though, however, and then you'll have to pardon my French, evidently has a stick up her ass. So,
She's the worst. While we're here, Barbara Henry, so she's the teacher who she, as we will see in a minute, becomes Ruby's teacher. She's played by Penelope Ann Miller, who was in things like Biloxi Blues, Kindergarten Cop, Chaplin, Carlito's Way. I think she has a pretty recognizable face. Like when I saw her, I was like, oh, I've seen
yeah.
her before.
Hmm.
And then Miss Woodmere is played by the actress Diana Scarvid. She was Christina Crawford in Mommy Dearest. She was in Truman. She has also been on episodes of Criminal Minds and Law and Order SVU. So, anyways, on the first day of school, Ruby and her mom just sit in the office all day. And then the bell rings, and Miss Woodmere is like, "You all are dismissed." And this part did make me laugh because Ruby's like, "This school's easy, mama."
Sorry. Yeah, and her mom, you could just the look on her mother's face. It's like, really? I've been sitting here all day because she works,
Yeah.
so she had to take off work
Hmm.
to sit there on that damn hard, bench all day in the
Yeah, her and the U.S. Marshals,
in
our
the
taxpayer
principal's office.
dollars.
I know, really, yeah. I don't even know if they got lunch. So,
Yeah. I mean, Ruby and her mom brought lunch, so maybe they brought their own lunch too.
well, that's true. Yeah. So
So,
probably maybe the senior marshal sent the younger marshal out for something to eat. So,
for sure.
yep.
Um, we also meet another character around this time, Dr. Robert Coles. He's played by Kevin Pollak, who this is an actor, I think if you've ever watched a movie, you've seen him in something. He's one of those character actors, kind of a support in like a bunch of supporting roles that like you've always seen. A Few Good Men, The Usual Suspects, Casino. He was on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. He's in uh, these are some of my references. Juana Man, The Wedding Planner. He's in That Thing You Do. She's All That, and then The Whole 9 Yards and The Whole 10 Yards. He
Oh,
was
okay.
also on an episode of Law and Order SVU. But
And by the
yes,
way, in real life, he does outstanding impressions of other actors, and
yes,
his Jack Nicholson is needs to be seen.
yes, he's an impressionist, and I think he does a podcast too.
Oh, does he? Okay.
Nowadays, like
Yeah.
like like everyone else. But yeah, Kevin Pollak, I think once you see him, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen him in
Yeah.
movies. But
Yeah.
he plays Dr. Robert Coles, who's a child psychiatrist, and he was actually on the day that Ruby was trying to go to school. He was trying to get somewhere, but like all the roads were blocked. So he's like, hmm. He comes home and talks to his wife, Jane, who's played by Jean Louisa Kelly. She's another person that I think has been in a lot of things. She was on the show Yes Dear. She's in Uncle Buck was her first movie.
Oh,
I think
okay.
she's one of the kids. She's in the Fantastics. I remember her from Mr. Holland's Opus.
Okay.
That's his wife, Jane. He comes home and he's talking to his wife and he's like, I want to try to help that little girl because his work, his research had been in helping kids that were in really stressful situations. He refers talking to kids who were like in polio wards and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where his expertise lies. And he's like, maybe I can be of use. He's also an airman. He's in the Air Force, I believe.
He's an officer in the Air Force, yeah. So he's either a captain at this point or a major. I can't remember
Yeah,
which, but yeah,
he did
he's
not have a lot of insignia happening. Um, So, anyways, the next day, it's kind of the same. Ruby and her mom go to school. Her mom clearly had taken off work to go like for the first couple days.
hmm
But it's the same, the screaming, the yelling, the mobs. Now we see Confederate flags. because people were really trying to represent their heritage,
Mhm,
obviously.
mhm.
They were like, we should let this little girl know about our heritage. That's definitely why they had them. And people are spitting on them, which is just disgusting. I'm
It
sorry.
is. It is.
It's actually considered assault, people. But this time she actually gets to go to class. She meets her new teacher, Miss Henry. So Miss Henry came from Boston, and she is apparently the only non-racist white lady in this building. So she's like, "All right, I'm your teacher."
Well, she's from up north. Come on.
Yes.
So,
The other teachers and staff look like disgusted at her.
oh, yeah. It's like, how could you
How dare you?
possibly, yeah, how
Mhm.
could you even stay in the same classroom with that child? So,
Right. She seems like super nice and friendly. And then also Dr. Coles, meanwhile, is trying to like figure out how to talk to Ruby. He talks to the marshal and then eventually talks to Miss Woodmere. But in the classroom, the windows are open and you can hear the yelling and screaming from outside because they're still there.
oh,
They don't wait. They don't like leave when she gets in the building.
I wrote down, don't these people get tired? I mean, they're like, they're, unless they're doing it in shifts,
Like
it's
they don't have
like
none of them have jobs.
jobs. Well, a lot of them are not to, at that time, maybe a lot of women did not work, but a lot of them seem to be, moms or, or maybe, but I'm like, really? This is all you got to do all day? Who's,
Right. And it's interesting. So Dr. Coles is talking to Miss Woodmere, and he's like, I want to talk to this child. And she's like, there is nothing interesting about that colored child. And
mm-hmm.
I don't want to get involved. And she's
Yeah.
like, why don't you talk to the people who sent her here? And she directs him to the NAACP. In the class, we see that Ruby is obviously very smart. The Miss Henry is telling her mother like she clearly like she writes well. She writes like because when you're 6, the handwriting is iffy. You've only just learned to write, but she apparently writes really well and like knows a lot of words and all this stuff. So she's doing very well.
Yeah, she's smart
Um,
because I remember the exercise one I remember is like, how many words can you make out of this one word,
yeah, she like
And
writes down the word Christmas or something and is like,
yeah,
how many other words can you
and
make?
I got news for you folks. Ruby beat me, so I'm just letting you know. So maybe it was in the script, but I'm just saying. So,
Yeah. So the other teachers do not want to interact with Miss Henry. Like she's trying to go find the teacher's lounge to like eat her lunch or whatever, and they're like, integration is a disgrace and you're part of it and da 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 da. People have resigned rather than teach Ruby. And what's funny is like the person who says that then like immediately shifts into prayer. And it's like, wow, how Christian of you.
I even wrote that down. Like, oh, the teacher will pray, but then won't teach. And I put in quotation marks the colored people, or
Mm-hmm.
students, kids, because that's what she said. So it's like, oh, right, yeah, like now you're supposed to be all pious and everything, where you're all forgiving, all accepting, all loving,
Mm-hmm.
as Jesus tells us to be. Okay, but no, no to the teaching thing.
Yeah. They're like,
When it comes to Ruby,
we do not teach them, and our children do not learn with them.
them, yes,
Back at home, Ruby's dad is he's like still not keen on this. He says it's dangerous.
yeah, I think he's
And
worried for
yeah, and I think it's reasonable because
her.
like people are screaming stuff at her,
Yeah,
like it's
well,
awful.
she has four armed people guarding
Right.
her to get to school.
Most children do not require this to get to
Exactly.
school
Don't,
safely.
yeah, there's
But
an
yeah,
option.
Ruby's mom is like, she's telling him to stop being scared. And he's like,
Hmm.
excuse me. I literally fought in the Korean War and survived. I'm not scared.
Right. I have
Don't,
medals. He tells her,
don't,
I have medals,
yeah, he
but
has a purple heart.
yes.
So, like,
So,
you don't actually have to tell me about being scared. And she's just like, that school is better, and my
right.
kids deserve better. And we
And
have to take affirmative action to make it better. And I do not want to be scared. And so I think both of them are very reasonable. They both have very reasonable points.
I was going, yeah, they come from maybe a little bit different perspective. Maybe her dad saw things while he was in the service and so on, because this was before, the units were integrated and so on and so forth, that, led him to believe that, Ruby's not going to get a benefit out of this, that this is maybe just lip service, or, that they're putting her in danger, by allowing her to go forward with this. So, and not being a father though, but I can appreciate how he might feel about his little girl.
Yeah. So the next day, mom has to go back to work. So Ruby has to go alone with the marshals. And the mom tells her, they're very religious also.
Hmm.
She's like, Jesus faced a mob and he prayed for them. So you can do that too. And also that day we see there's also some black folks outside of the school. They're not like yelling, but they're there,
Hmm.
kind of across the street, it looks like.
I was
But
going to
they're
say,
kind
yeah,
of
they're in the vicinity, but
but they're kind of standing there in some like solidarity.
hmm
There's a man that says he wants to hang her. Again, I just like the how could you muster up saying that to a child?
don't know.
This is also a moment where you see specific references to the painting too, because there's racist graffiti. The N word is written on the building,
Hmm.
which is in the painting, and people are throwing tomatoes, which is also depicted in the painting. But Ruby, once again, she does not look back, and you can hear her like inner monologue is just hearing like her parents, what they've
Yeah.
told her, right? Like her dad is like, you are my like brave, smart little girl. And her mom is like, Jesus did this too, pray for them,
Hmm.
da da da. The teachers are still unhappy to see her, but Miss Henry is there, greeting her, coming up. Oh my God, you look so nice today, holding her hand. Super nice. And it's funny later, Ruby's talking to one of her friends who now goes to private school. And I love this line too. Ruby's like, well, my school is really private because it's just me. Because she is
Yeah.
literally the only child in this school right
in
now.
the, in the whole school, yeah.
Why are
So,
those teachers getting paid?
well, that's what I want to know. I want to
They're
know
just coming
what.
to eat lunch.
I guess teleworking wasn't a thing back then, or you could just, just say, hey, I'm, because they're all dressed up like they're going to do something, but they're not. So,
Um, Later the dad comes home with a bunch of donuts after work, and Ruby's like, "Oh, donuts." And he's like, "Oh, the bakery wanted to reward you and your bravery." But actually we find out when he tells the mom his boss fired him because of Ruby being in a white school.
mhm.
Even though like he's good at his job. He was a mechanic or like worked at
Right.
like a
I
gas
think
like a service station. And basically he had a friend that worked at the bakery, and they like kind of saw what happened, him getting
yeah,
fired, and they felt bad, so they just gave him kind of all the rest of their donuts
yeah.
basically.
He had a lot of donuts,
It was like two very full bags of
bags
donuts. It
of
was a lot of
donuts. Yeah,
donuts.
yeah, yeah.
They are going to eat a ton of
Wouldn't
donuts.
you think they would have been beignets being in New Orleans?
You would think. Anyways, Ruby's dad is upset, of course. He
Rightfully
doesn't,
so. Yeah.
yeah, he doesn't feel like, he feels like they're doing this maybe for no good reason, because integration does not work to him, because he was in the military, right, which is presumably an integrated institution, right? Harry Truman
Right.
integrated the military.
Supposedly. Yeah.
But in reality, he was still a quote unquote colored soldier,
Right.
right?
And,
And
and
then when he came, white people, and then when he came home, that didn't matter at all, anyways. So it was
no.
like still bad in the military, and then like even worse when he gets home, because
Right.
he's like, white people are fine if I'm gonna die for them, but when I get home, they remind me it is their country and not mine.
Exactly.
And Lucielle is like trying to be reassuring. She's like, she's very sad and upset, but she's like, she seems like a very faithful person, right? She's like, I know that
Hmm.
it will be
It'll
okay.
it'll work out, right. And I'll pray on this, and which is,
Yeah.
that's her, yeah, that's her background, that's her
Hmm.
faith, her strength.
Yeah. And I think you can see throughout the movie. I mean, it seems to work.
Hmm.
So the next day, since dad is not working, he wants to go with Ruby to school. But the marshals are actually like, sir, you should not. Basically, because it's you're going to want to fight all those people that are yelling stuff at
Yeah,
your
yeah,
daughter.
yeah. You're gonna and I think it's really it's for his own safety because
Yeah.
that they
It
can't
like
protect him.
exactly. Stuff will escalate if you're
Yes,
there. We
yeah,
know that. And
yeah.
like I'm
Because
sure those guys were fathers too, so they're like
yeah.
we know what's going to happen and like we can't let that happen.
Plus, yeah, to them it's like they don't want to worry about what he does, because they can take care of Ruby,
Yeah.
But yeah, at least that's the impression I got that,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. And you
Um
can tell he's like, I can't even protect my own little girl.
yeah. Yeah. But I mean
So,
he like acquiesces and I'm sure that he probably is like, you know what? I would have
well, when you think, yeah, he was a soldier, combat soldier. So, yeah, his first instinct is going to be, you don't say those things to my daughter,
Mhm.
and I'm going to
Mhm.
beat your ass,
And then things will just escalate quickly.
escalate exactly. And then the marshals have to shoot somebody, and then there's all that paperwork.
Exactly. Exactly. So, back at school, Miss Henry is talking to Miss Woodmere of whatever administrative role she has, and she's like, "So Ruby also needs to have like she's supposed to have physical education, she's supposed to have music." She's basically like,
Recess,
yeah.
yeah,
Miss Woodmere is basically like the way she talks, Ruby was an inconvenience for which they were not given time to prepare, is her kind of stance.
right,
Well, this was thrust upon us and we could
mhm,
not have planned for this. So,
right. We had no time to prepare for this.
and so you can see Miss Henry just does it all with her then. They're in there doing jumping jacks in their
Yeah.
dresses and
And I guess she's teaching her music, or whether they march around or showing her like or
yeah.
whatever. So yeah,
Yeah, maybe she's just doing some basic like
yeah,
scales, teaching her
could be, yeah,
notes and
yeah.
stuff. The parents are still out there. These white people are still out there yelling.
They're
Once
ambitious.
again,
You got to give them credit. I mean, well,
when
there
do
wasn't a
y'all
whole lot of
work?
daytime TV,
Yeah,
so
I guess so.
yeah,
And Ruby wants to know. I think she asked Miss Henry, like, when are the other kids coming back?
right,
And she's like, oh, I don't know. It'll eventually.
yeah.
Um, the Dr. Boyard from the NAACP brings over Dr. Coles and his wife to meet the Bridges. He wants to help talk to Ruby about what she's going through, and Ruby's dad is like, nope.
Yeah, well, I like how it's the stigma of then but because he tells him a psychiatrist and he says there's no crazy people here.
Yeah, yeah. And then also he's like, well, we can't afford that.
Right, yeah,
And he's like, oh, it would be for free. And I think there's also like a pride
right. That
piece there,
no,
especially
wait a
because, and we see it come up more and more with like the NAACP guys, obviously, like they're like richer than the Bridges.
more
And
well-to-do, and
yeah,
I get the feeling I guess they're because they give the dad like envelopes. I guess they're taking up either money or whatever to help him as he's not working because he said,
yeah.
as I can't pay my rent or whatever, he said your needs will be met,
Hmm.
but by the
Yeah.
NAACP, the
Yeah, they have their
organization.
membership is like collecting donations, but
Yeah, but even still,
um
to him, it's like charity.
yeah.
It's yeah. So if he can't, provide for his family,
Hmm. Um Ruby is eating lunch by herself every day because Miss Henry goes to like eat in the teacher's lounge.
which I couldn't kind of
I
get.
know, I was like, why don't you just eat with her?
Why don't you just eat with Ruby? Yeah, maybe maybe Miss Henry wants a little bit of like trying to build that bridge between her and the other teachers. I don't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe she thinks, well, if I just stay in this classroom all day, they'll just think, that I don't want to associate with them.
Hmm.
And I don't know, maybe I'm thinking too hard about that. So,
Yeah. But
but
I
I
had the same
wondered why she
question.
just didn't say, "Hey, Ruby, I'll eat lunch with you," because you could see when she left, like Ruby was like, "Oh, I'm just here all alone,"
Yeah, she like gives her a book and Ruby just like knocks over the book.
I know, yeah, just like clunk.
But you do see like the one of the marshals like poke his head in and wink at her and she is happy to have like a little moment of like interaction.
Yeah, like a little, yeah, somebody acknowledge her, but it almost kind of felt like, to be honest, but like Groundhog Day. It's like the same thing every day.
Yeah.
It's like the same
God, I would have been
routine.
so bored at
Oh, I
school. Can you imagine
know.
being in first grade just by yourself?
No, no.
It would have driven me nuts.
I'd love it now, but no.
Yeah, but not when you were 6.
No, exactly.
You want to
Yeah.
play with other kids.
Yeah. Live for recess.
Exactly. The next part, this is what you were getting at. The Dr. Broyard and Mrs. Broyard from the NAACP are over at the Bridges house, and Lucille asked them about helping Abin get another job.
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, well, you should like lay low, basically. Because if you're out looking for a job, that's kind of bringing more attention, and that's sort of part of the issue. And they get donations, but like you're saying, Abin is worried about like paying his bills, taking care of his. They have like 3 or 4. They have 4 kids, I think.
4 kids. Yeah. Ruby's only one of four. So, and they're
Yeah.
all, you know,
And they're like, well, it's a privilege to have like your daughter doing this. And he's like, oh, wow, this is such a privilege to have
oh,
lost my job and have my kid be escorted to school by US Marshals every day. Woohoo. Like, what a privilege.
yeah, he does. I like this part where he sort of he gets able to, he gets able to say, how he feels and, what this, how this impacts him,
Hmm. Yeah.
as opposed to, Ruby or whatever. So,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, this
And
is
I
not the
think,
greatest thing that's ever happened to my family, buddy.
right. And I think that I'm glad that they like included that part in this movie because I think we can think of like, all the sort of like heroic things that happen around the civil rights movement, but also like these things were very hard and deliberate sacrifices that people
Hmm.
were making,
Exactly.
right? Like they are putting their 6-year-old in harm's way,
Yeah. I
really.
mean,
Like if we're
yeah.
not, and I don't say that as like they intend that, but like, you know what I mean? They know that this is a risk.
Yeah, that they're putting their Ruby's life in the hands of these people,
Hmm.
literally,
Yeah.
not just figuratively, but literally. So,
She's being threatened with death every
yeah,
day.
every day. So, and all it takes is one person to cross that line, and then who knows what could happen.
Yeah, and I think it goes to also I think that we think about some of these things as just like heroic actions of an individual, but there is actually a whole like plan and setup and structure around it, right? Like people, for example, like Rosa Parks. People are like, "Oh, she was just an old lady who was tired and sat down on the front of the bus." No, Rosa Parks was like a trained activist.
Right, right.
She knew what would happen. There was a plan of like who could help her legally, right? Like this was set up. There are people around her. There's a whole structure. And I think
Right.
that's what you get to see in this movie.
Yeah, it wasn't just a off a spur of the moment thing or off the cuff
Hmm.
moment. And going back to Mississippi Burning,
Hmm.
the young students, they were trained activists. They, because they said that they would have reported in.
Hmm.
There was a protocol, there was a plan, like you said.
Hmm.
So,
I think so much of like stuff around the civil rights movement was so intentional. And I think people sometimes when we talk about it as an era of history, it's just like, wow, like the bridges weren't like, okay, well, we're just gonna send Ruby to this school now. But no, it
yeah,
was like she was selected by the NAACP. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was a whole thing. Like even like
right,
Martin Luther King, right? They marched in their Sunday best for a reason because he was aware of the optics, like the
exactly.
police beating people in like their church clothes,
As opposed to
right?
just wearing street clothes or casual clothes. Exactly. So,
So
yeah,
it meant something. So I'm glad that they have this angle of it
yeah.
also.
Yeah. Again, they showed both sides. They showed,
Yeah.
you depict every part of history, not just, you don't, sugarcoat it or
It's not
whatever.
all sunshine and rain. It's not like one day Ruby went to this white school and everybody was like, "Oh, we're all
Uh,
equal. Yay.
Yay, it's all fixed now. So, yeah,
Racism over."
over. Segregation done in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
No, no.
And then things take a little bit of a turn. We're getting a little bit more of the negative side.
Mm,
Ruby calls one of her siblings the N-word and says she'll kill him. And
mhm.
then we also see her putting a little noose around one of her dolls.
Oh, I know. That's so sad.
It was like gruesome.
I know.
And then they call Dr. Coles. They're like, well,
Mm,
guess we
maybe,
could use you.
maybe Ruby could talk to somebody.
Mm-hmm. They're like, all right, yeah, yep, yep, yeah, this we need something happening here. So Dr. Coles comes over and he, as this is usually how kind of child psychiatry, psychology works, it's a lot of drawings because that's how kids can kind of express. They can't necessarily express themselves like verbally very well, like
Oh,
describe
okay. I
what's
wondered
going
about
on.
that. Okay.
So you see a lot if like therapy with children does involve a lot of like drawing or like play with like toys, right? That kind of stuff.
Is that why my
Um,
therapist does that with me? That's odd.
well, she's like, oh, he's not too good with words.
Well, he did go to public school in West Virginia, so okay.
Yeah.
Folks, I can say that because I actually did. So it's not, I'm not making fun of people from West Virginia. I'm from West Virginia. So
Yes, exactly. But yeah, she's drawing stuff and he's like asking her about the mobs and she's like, "Oh, because she doesn't draw them." And he's like, "Oh, why didn't you draw them?" And she was like, "Well, I don't see them
right.
because I don't look at them." And she doesn't at least initially show signs of being scared or traumatized. And you can see that there is a little bit we see this as they continue, but she's kind of like hiding it
Hmm.
because I think a part of it is like, I think when you're a little kid, you want to do what your parents want. And, all these adults keep being like, you are a brave little girl and you're doing such a
Hmm.
good job. So I think
Right.
she's trying to put on a brave face because that's what they,
Yeah. It's what they expect. And then,
hmm
she doesn't want to disappoint, particularly
yeah.
like you said, her mom and dad.
hmm Yeah. And I mean, even if she doesn't know the full extent of what she's doing, she knows that like they've told her she's doing something important. So it
Important.
does.
Yeah.
And I think for a little kid, that's especially like, oh, wow, I'm
Yeah.
doing something important.
Port. Well, she could look around and go, well, I'm the only one that looks like me here. So
I'm the only one here,
here,
period.
yeah, well, that's true. Yeah. So,
And then eventually she's the only
mm,
one who looks like her there.
hmm
But
true. Good
um
point.
yeah, and we see that sort of come out in the therapy soon too. But the anger continues. This is when the one white lady starts saying she's gonna poison her.
Yeah.
And there's another old white lady. This is the baby doll in the coffin
Yeah.
happens. That to like I don't know why that maybe it's like
Well, you
it's
you were a
it's stuck with
little,
her
you were a
too.
young girl. Yeah. So,
Because she starts showing fear, right? She's coming into her parents' bedroom at night. She's having nightmares. She needs to
yeah.
sleep with them. They tell her to go like pray. But yeah, like that, the baby doll in the coffin, that is always the part that I remembered. And because I think I asked my mom about that specifically because I was like, what does that like what does that
Yeah.
even like mean?
Right.
Why is she doing that?
Why would she show her that? Why would she,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And that was weird. And I think because like I like as a little girl, like I like to play with dolls. So I think like seeing a doll like
Right.
used
Yeah.
like that was just like,
And
oh my God.
and you're not Wednesday Addams, so it's not like you can
Right. I'm not chopping my doll's heads off with a guillotine.
just saying. That came later, right?
Yes, exactly. We also see Mrs. Stein, who runs the grocery store. Ruby and her dad go in as usual. They're picking up some milk, being pleasant. There are some scary looking white dudes in there, which we've not
Very
seen
much so.
before.
Yeah. Some, yeah.
And some how would they good old boys.
Oh, yeah.
Uh
I think they were in the cast of the last movie we saw.
yeah.
So just saying. Or they were, yeah, they're the usual gang of idiots,
Yeah, they
as
rolled
we
on over from Mississippi burning. They
exactly
went next door to Louisiana.
Louisiana. Hey, fellas, we hear something's going on over in Louisiana. So
Yeah. Uh and the dad is mad. The Mrs. Stein is like, you guys can't shop here anymore. And the dad
oh,
is
I
like,
know.
are
It's
you kidding me? These people wouldn't come. They didn't want to buy stuff from Jewish people, so it was actually black people that gave you business
and
when
he
white
said they
people.
were the first family in there, that it was
Hmm
him, that came there.
Yeah, he's like the white people here would not buy stuff from someone who's Jewish, and we did.
Right.
So I see how it is. Is basically
Yep.
like what he's like.
Now
Okay.
I know. Yep. But now we can't come in here.
hmm hmm We also see a change. Ruby will not eat. She will only eat packaged foods. She like, and at first it seems like she's just a little kid, right? Her mom
Right.
prepares her meal and she's
Hmm.
like, I want some chips and a Coca-Cola.
Hmm.
And so it seems like she's just a little kid who doesn't want to eat food. but it continues. And even at school, she's hiding pieces of her lunch throughout the classroom, which we learn later has caused a bit of a vermin infestation.
Just a touch.
Cockroaches. I
Is it
love a
right?
southern person saying cockroach.
Cockroach.
And I also think Ruby, again, Ruby's starting to notice what happened because she asked her mom if Mrs. Stein from the grocery store is one of those white ladies outside the school yelling at her.
Yeah.
And the mom is like, "No, I don't." The mom's like, "They don't really like her either."
But
Um,
but then Ruby tells her, well, she says we can't come into the store anymore,
yeah.
mom, and then she didn't know, and then I think she asks the husband, didn't she? Then what happened or whatever? Because I don't think
Hmm.
he told her.
Yeah, but and Ruby's asking her mom some more like, "Is this because of me? Like, why don't they like me?" Because she thinks it's like personal
Right.
to her. Because that's a little kid thing, right? Your
Yeah.
world is you. You're
Yeah.
egocentric, not in a bad way, but just like
No, but I mean,
when you're
yeah,
a little
you
kid, your world is very small,
right. Well,
and you
just
understand everything as in relation to yourself. And her mom is like, it is nothing to do with you. You are great. You are special. You are amazing. It's just that basically she's like, these people are mad and they're wrong and they're loud. They are loud and
mhm,
wrong.
mhm.
The next day she's going to school and someone steps out of this crowd
Oh,
towards them, and the marshal
he starts to go for his
immediately he
gun,
starts to go for his gun, and one of them snatches up Ruby and runs in. And it actually turns out it's just a guy trying to bring his daughter to school.
and a minister.
Yes, a
Uh,
white clergyman is trying to bring his daughter to school. He's like, I'm sorry. This is
yep.
my daughter's school and I'm just trying to like bring her in. Um,
And then all the other people call him traitor, and then like
yeah. He
they
gets
turn
spit
on
on
him.
too.
Yeah, I was going to say then they turn on him, and then he's spit on, and
Right. It's not even enough for these people for them to hate black people. It's like, how dare everyone else also not hate black people? It's
exa
like
well, at least they're equal opportunity haters.
the hatred just like bubbles over. Like,
The hate is strong with this crowd.
but obviously that was a traumatic moment for Ruby, right?
Hmm.
She's now crying
Right,
and she's
because
asking Miss Henry, like, what is going on? Like, why? Miss Henry has to comfort her, and she's telling her like Miss Henry's saying like everybody is special and we respect all people no matter what color they are, and some people do not like people because of the color of their skin is different, and that is wrong.
mhm,
We do not support that. And Ruby is like, why? And Miss Henry, because Miss Henry understands the importance of talking about history. She explains, she starts talking to Ruby about slavery,
mhm,
because obviously that's where it all started. And then the Civil War, there's a big fight between the North and the South. And there are some people that are still mad that slavery went away. And they're so angry that they don't like anyone, especially themselves. And Ruby's very like crying throughout all of this. She's
oh
very upset
yeah,
and emotional.
she's upset, sure.
And the teacher says like they feel knocked down, so they just want to knock other people down, and that's not the right thing to do. So I think it's actually she like explains it kind of
I
as
think
well as she could,
yeah, to especially to a 6-year-old
to a
girl.
6-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
I think she's correct, right? These people are so angry and resentful, and they don't like themselves either.
yeah,
Because
there's
if you felt secure in yourself, you would not need to do all this towards other people. So yeah, back at the Bridges house, Dr. Coles continues to come over. Basically, he and his wife, but yeah, so they drive all the way from Biloxi. So him and his wife go. His wife just like hangs out with the mom and like learns how to
I know
cook.
they're in the kitchen and they're like,
They're just
boy,
like hanging out.
and I guess back in the day, I remember my mom drinking coffee because, oh, would you like another cup of coffee? It's like, well, now I've already had 12, but it's
It's 8 p.m.
yeah, and they're
I'm gonna
having
be
like,
up for 3 days now.
yeah, so,
But yeah, like she like learns how to make red beans and rice from the mom, and but Dr. Coles, Bob, he won't eat any of the food there, and he's like, "Oh no, we gotta go."
he
He's
won't
like,
even have a glass of water.
right, he's like still like weirdly standoffish. He's one of those people that's like, "Oh, I'm not like racist, but I don't want to like eat black people's food."
Well, I wondered if if maybe he thought he was getting he didn't want to get too close personally because he was treating Ruby as a patient. You know what I don't know, maybe
Yeah, but also they're like,
so
don't bring your wife.
well, yeah, that's the other part of it. So it was kind of
Yeah.
like, yeah,
I think that he might, if you had asked him, I think he might say that.
yeah. That
I don't
I
believe that that is the extent of what's going on. I think,
I,
well,
I get you.
he's uncomfortable. I will say, I'll give him that.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
uncomfortable. I don't know that
For,
he's not hostile, but he is uncomfortable.
no, not yeah. So and to Ruby, he's very sweet and very. It seems to me very
Mhm.
compassionate, and very
Yes.
caring. So
Yeah. And I think also because he does say that he's used to working with like well-to-do like white kids in the
that's true. I
polio
forgot
ward.
about that. Yeah, that's
So I
true.
think this is just a different world for him.
Different
But
experience. Yeah.
things do get better.
So he did go to Harvard.
He did.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
Um,
yeah, those Harvard men.
but he does in this visit, he's like, is there anything else that's going on with Ruby? Because
Mm,
she's like not telling him anything. She's
right.
like,
She's
oh no,
sort of
everything's
shut
good.
down. Yeah.
Like even when he'll like ask her follow-up questions, she's like, she's preparing like the little fake tea party. And
Mm-hmm.
he's trying to ask her follow-up questions, and she's like, oh, the tea is ready.
Mm-hmm.
Like even at 6, she's like, let me change the subject.
Yeah. Gee.
That's uncomfortable. But
Really?
they,
Does it really start that young with women? Is that how you all do that?
I don't know. It probably starts out young with everybody, but boys just
I
like throw something at you.
I guess I don't know.
And
So,
girls
but
are like, oh, my tea is ready.
yeah.
But the parents finally do say that she will only eat packaged foods. And he's like, oh, well, when I was there, because he still does go to observe
Mhm.
the mob yelling at Ruby. So he knows like what she's experiencing and he
Yeah.
knows like what to ask about. He's like, there's a woman that's saying she's going to poison her. So that's probably it. And her parents like kind of lose it.
Yeah.
Like the mom like runs from the room and you can hear her like sobbing from the
Yeah.
next room. And the dad is like, you're going to have to like show you, you're going to have to show
Show
yourselves out.
yourself out. Yeah,
Like
because
I
this
can't.
is very upsetting. That
Yeah. Cuz that's like a crazy thing to hear, but like imagine someone's going to wants to like poison your
poison
kid.
your child. Yeah,
And she has
exactly.
heard that and taken it in to the extent that she is paranoid that she's going to be poisoned.
Right. Yeah, like you said, she won't eat anything that's not in a package. So,
Yeah. I wonder too, because I can't imagine like a 6-year-old coming up with that on their own. I wonder if like the marshals said something to her about
it's
like,
possible. Yeah, like
because in real
or
life, the marshals wouldn't let her eat anything she didn't bring from home.
right.
So I wonder if maybe they, in like the universe, like
Sort
they
of
would have said something to her about like, hey, you can
reinforce
only
that.
eat certain things. And
Right.
then she, like little kids, she got scared and like was like,
Took it to
I'm
an
eating like
extreme.
nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lucille is like, she feels like it's her fault. She wants to pull her out of she's like, I guess we should pull her out of the school. Like,
Yeah. She's ready to call it quits at this point.
and we also know at this point, the way Ruby is drawing, that she has internalized, like many people, many children, that white people are better than black people because she draws white people with much more detail and they like look nicer, and black people look deformed. She won't even like use the brown crayon on them. Like, and the dad, I thought this was interesting. He pulls down the picture of white Jesus from their hallway. And he's like, we're telling her that this is like the most important person to have ever lived, and this, it doesn't look like her.
Right.
Um, and so she has all these ideas. Like, not only is there the poisoning stuff, but she also has these very warped ideas about like black and white. And it's interesting too, because that kind of stuff is actually helped form the basis for the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. So there's a lot of, people can look into this, but there was a lot of research being done. You would show like a little black child, a white doll and a black doll, and ask them to describe them. And they would call the white doll like pretty and nice and good, and the black doll would be ugly and bad and wrong and mean and like all this stuff.
Oh, okay.
So it was basically to show that like this separate but quote unquote equal was
Equal.
actually having a really detrimental effect on these black kids. So that's some of the evidence that Thurgood Marshall, shout out to Baltimore, brought to the Supreme Court, and that formed part of the basis for their decision in Brown versus the board. So you can see that even with integration, that obviously didn't like immediately go away.
Yeah.
There is a funny moment here. So the Coles get home, and Dr. Coles wants some food, and his wife is like, "Oh, I already ate. I had some red beans and rice."
And it was delicious.
And it was good. So I'm good. I'm going to bed. Good night. Because he had refused. He was offered red beans and rice and he refused. Because he wouldn't eat any of the Bridges food. So that part made me laugh. She was like, "Oh no,
Yeah, that was funny.
I'm
Yeah.
good.
Yep.
If
Nope.
you're hungry, make a sandwich, maybe? I don't
Yeah, or yeah, there's peanut butter and bread, so knock
know."
yourself out.
Yeah. Um, the next day Ruby comes home and she has gotten all A's in all of her classes. And now you can see the dad is now like, I don't know if we should pull her out.
Right,
Because
because
like she's doing very well. Like this is
yeah,
good for, there is like the wife was saying, like it is a better school. She is getting a better education and like kind of thriving
yeah, and she's doing
academically.
well with it. She's not struggling,
Yeah.
somebody put into a more accelerated program and then they struggle to keep up. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
she only has to keep up with herself.
Mm-hmm.
So far she's doing really good.
Yeah. And then we also start to see more white kids are coming back into the school, like a handful, not a ton, but
Yeah.
a few. And even I love that like the awful lady shouting about poisoning her, her son like escapes from her grasp and runs in. And she's like, "Don't you dare go in that school, Jimmy. What are you doing?" Is his name? His name's Jimmy, right?
Jimmy, yeah.
"Don't you dare go in that school, Jimmy." And he's like, he just like looks at her and like goes
Yeah.
into the school.
I want to go to school. I want to be with my friends. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Golf, dingbat.
Lucille is trying to get Ruby to eat. It does seem like she's making a little bit of progress because she's like, "Ruby, you came to the store with me. You watched me buy this sealed bag of rice, and then you watched me cook it. I promise you there is no poison in it."
Right.
She does, maybe like baby steps.
Yeah.
Um, and Ruby's like, "Are they ever gonna stop? The people outside of school, are they ever gonna stop?" And the mom, once again, is kind of just, telling her to pray and rely on the Lord.
Mhm.
Um, the guy from the NAACP and his wife come. They have gifts for Ruby, like this box of like really fancy clothes, which like I love. Ruby's little sister immediately just like steals one.
Yeah.
Her mom is like, "Ruby, you have to share."
Yeah.
Because I think also they're trying to like not really like inflate her ego too much, kind
Well,
of amongst her
exactly.
siblings.
Yeah, or her sister goes, "Why does Ruby get all the nice clothes? The pretty clothes, and I don't get
Hmm.
anything." So, because
Yeah,
that's how kids are. So
yeah.
it's yeah,
And they want Ruby. They're like, you're special, but like they don't want her to think she's like better than her siblings or
right,
whatever.
exactly. Yeah,
And the Boyards invite Ruby to spend the night, like spend like a weekend or whatever with their kids and like learn how to play the piano at their house because they have a piano. And
and
it's like,
I think the
ooh,
the then the wife
the wife
she
can
gives
like
piano lessons or
teach
can
her,
play. Yeah,
yeah.
can play piano or something. Yeah,
And Lucille, her mom is like all for it, but her dad Abin is like, you could tell his vibe is like, "Oh brother, these people
yeah,
again." He like
yeah.
kind of rolls his eyes and leaves. He's like, they don't. He talks to Lucille. You and I talked about this a little bit already, but like, he's like, they don't care about Ruby. She's like, they're not their real friends. They're using her because obviously, and I mean to some extent that's true, right? The NAACP is trying to make gains
Right.
for Black folks, and that does require like individual people to be kind of like the test cases, the sort of like trailblazers, the first one out the gate.
Sure.
And so they are using her. Obviously, Ruby is benefiting from this, but like certainly they are using her to some extent, and
Yeah.
but it's something they consented to. They're not doing it without anybody's knowledge. It's not nefarious. But it did remind me of in Mississippi Burning when all the mean white people describe the college students who had gone missing, the like
Hmm.
civil rights workers, as being used by like the NAACP
Right.
and stuff. And again, I think it's interesting because it's like, they're from two very different like angles, right? Like
Yeah.
Abin is worried more about like their safety and like that they're kind of dealing with the consequences. The the white people in Mississippi Burning are like they should not be doing this.
Right, yeah, but oh, you all are just using them as, to further your propaganda, or, however you want
Yeah, like they disagree. Their problem is with the mission.
to. Right,
Mr. Bridges' problem is not with the mission. It's with like they are dealing with the consequences.
exactly.
Um,
They're getting all the negative side of the things, as
yes.
the
We're
NAACP
getting the
is reaping the
brunt.
the the, the positive side of the,
Yeah,
oh, look what we're doing down in New Orleans. We've got,
exactly.
this little girl going to school, and
Mm.
so
And like you said, they're obviously more well-to-do if they have like a piano in their house. They're always looking very fancy. They're also like very light-skinned, which is like not their fault, but certainly affords them some privilege in the world. But yeah, so
yeah.
there's obviously like tension there. And I think I'm glad it's highlighted because I think it's real
Mm-hmm.
and it's reasonable.
Yeah.
Thankfully, though, things do turn around a little bit because they have a neighbor who has a painting company and he offers Abbott, he's like, "Hey, I need some help with
Yeah.
doing these painting gigs, so do you want to help?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, I do."
Yeah, like when after he said, he goes, look at me, a house painter. And
Yeah,
it's
you
like
could it's like he has
it's a
some like
pride.
yeah, and it's like an
Yeah.
identity thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's not just sitting on his butt at home.
Hmm. And just think
So
about it, like veterans too. Like we know lots of veterans who get out of the service and then they don't have a job, and it's like it's a struggle because there's no like you don't feel like you have purpose.
purpose, right? You don't have that mission in life. You don't have that
Hmm.
that you're not goal oriented, or
Yeah,
you
and
don't
I
have a
imagine
direction.
too, like a man thing
It
too,
is,
right? You're
yeah.
supposed to like,
Especially, back in that generation,
right?
you were the provider. You were the
Yeah,
breadwinner. So
yes. And at that
yeah,
point, like his wife is the only one like making any money,
right.
right?
And then
So,
he's relying on, handouts or donations from,
hmm,
the NAACP. So,
yeah. Um, Back at school, Ruby's like, okay, so there are other kids here, and yet I'm still by myself. What is going on? So Miss Henry confronts again Miss Woodmere, the administrator lady. Why is Ruby being isolated? And Miss Woodmere is like, well, the other teachers won't teach her. And she's like, okay, well, then send those kids to my class for part of the day. And she's
hmm
like, those kids won't accept her. And Miss Henry's like, first of all, integration is the law. So do you want me to make some calls or
What'd she say? I'll call the superintendent or
yes?
whatever, and,
I'm
and
sure
not like the
Superintendent so and so would love to hear about this.
yeah,
Um, so then the other kids come into her class for part of the day, and initially they are not trying to play with Ruby. They're playing Duck Duck Goose and they are skipping over her.
right, or yeah,
And she's like, Ruby is there. She is playing.
yep. You got a counter.
Yeah. When Ruby's talking to Dr. Coles, she's like, no, it doesn't really hurt my feelings. No. But he kind of continues to press her. And he's like, okay, so if I didn't want to play with you, how
Yeah.
would that feel for you? And she's like, oh, I would be sad
hmm
and lonely. So she does kind of admit it. This is when he pushes more and she's like, "Oh, our tea is ready for the tea party." We also learned that her friend Allison, the one who went to private school, her dad won't let her play with Ruby anymore
Right.
because of her going to because basically Ruby going to this white school has actually had an impact on the whole community. So like Mrs.
Evidently,
Stein won't sell to any of the black people in the community. Like it's, they have these roadblocks in their community, all this stuff. So it has had a ripple effect, not just on the Bridges family, but on everyone around. And people are upset about it. The next day, Ruby's going into school, and for the first time, she stops and she turns back around to look at them. Dr. Coles is like, I saw you like saying something to them.
hmm
What were you saying? And she was like, oh, well, every day I like pray for them before I get in the doors, but I had forgotten. Or she usually does it in the car.
yeah,
She prays for them, but she had forgotten that day. So she had to do it before she went into school. And she says something like, please God forgive these people because even if they say mean things, they don't know what they're doing. And you've, forgiven there were people that said mean things about you and you forgave them so you can forgive these people. And you can tell that Dr. Coles is like really moved by that.
yeah.
that
That,
she could, that a 6-year-old could have that level of like grace
hmm
for people who are actively threatening her life merely for being a black child.
exactly. That yes, that she has the yeah the dignity and the wherewithal to say to them, I forgive you, or
Hmm.
you
Or
know
that you should be forgiven
you
for
should
all
be
of this.
forgiven. Yeah.
Because
So
even if you're doing bad things, you don't really know.
that what you're doing is in
Yeah.
yeah. So
You can also see Dr. Coles is finally warming up to the Bridges. He'll drink water at their house.
yeah,
He'll eat their food. He's loving the gumbo. He's
yeah.
like, call me Bob.
Call me. Yeah.
Ruby's drawings are progressing, so you can see that like she's made some progress too in her like view of herself and other black folks. And he is using what he's gathered from Ruby's story as research on resilience in children.
hmm
And basically that like the Bridges family and Ruby in particular are like guided by like a reason, right? They know they're going through this for a reason. They also have like this faith in God, something kind of to believe in to give them strength to get through this, right? 'Cause she does know like this is part of like like a greater sort of mission here.
Sure. Yeah. There's a bigger plan here at work.
Yeah. Both like in a practical sense, right, from the NAACP, but also like she's has this faith in God that, she can kind of navigate through this. We also see that one of the other teachers, the teacher that like teaches the other kids, like one other teacher that seems to be doing her job, her name's Miss Spencer. She's actually also kind of warming up to Miss Henry.
Mm-hmm.
She'll like talk to her. This is also when the janitor and the principal find Ruby's hidden food because they're like, there are some mice and cockroaches in here.
Cockroaches.
And they find her food, and Miss Henry's like, I'm not mad at you, but like, why are you doing that? And then she
Yeah.
realizes that Ruby's been very lonely, so she finally eats with her. But I think Ruby won't even directly say it. She was like, sometimes I don't want to eat the food that my mama makes.
Yeah. Yeah. Not really confessing why she didn't want to eat the food, but
Mhm.
just saying.
Um, and then Dr. Coles comes over again. He brings a dollhouse and some little dolls so Ruby can kind of act out. Again, it's more like the play kind of therapy.
Oh, okay.
Um, because usually like when kids act things out, right, it's stuff that they've seen and observed with like their toys and dolls and stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's you can get an insight into like what they're experiencing through play. So she basically says one kid, Jimmy, is really mean to her and he pushes her. But you do start to see things get better. As Dr. Coles and Aben are going to kind of hang out, they see Mrs. Stein is delivering groceries to one of the black families in the neighborhood. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, things are calming down.
Starting to pick up a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
calm down.
And then Dr. Coles and Aben talk about his service because the bar they go to, the owner of the bar has his medals displayed on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously Dr. Coles is in the Air Force, so he's asking Aben about his service, and he has the Purple Heart from saving a white soldier
Yep.
in Korea. And he and again he says he doesn't really believe much in integration because everything, even though the army was integrated, air quotes around that, things are still very much separate.
Yeah. He didn't see any real big change or any big differences in his life.
Yeah. And Dr. Coles is like, this is very obviously this is like he's kind of acknowledging his privilege here, and he's like, you're probably going to think this sounds like really bad, but like before I met Ruby, I didn't think about segregation. And I
Mm-hmm.
think Aben says, well, you didn't have to.
Yeah.
You got to go wherever you
Right,
want.
exactly. Yeah, it
Of course
wasn't
you wouldn't think about it.
it wasn't an issue, yeah,
It
for
doesn't
you.
disrupt your life.
Right.
And
There
and
there
he
there weren't places you couldn't go to
right. You can
or
go in the
things
front
you couldn't
door
do.
and sit where you want and like do whatever. Uh and Dr. Cole says that, oh, you like this must make you angry. And he's kind of like, I was,
Hmm.
but he's actually learning a lot from Ruby too about how he doesn't have to
Right.
be angry.
Yeah.
Miss Henry gets Ruby's test scores and they're really, really good. But Miss Woodmere is like, well, they're too high, so I'm going to lower them. Just like kind of arbitrarily.
Yeah, just
But
like,
she
oh
she
yeah,
tries to justify it by saying that like because Ruby got one-on-one instruction, but Miss Henry's like, okay, but she did all the work.
yeah,
Like the test scores are what they are because she answered the questions correctly.
correctly. Yeah, she didn't get any like special favoritism or anything, and then uh that Miss Woodmere says, well, she had a private tutor, and Miss Henry said it's because of you all that she was alone in the class, not because of Ruby. She
Right.
didn't
That wasn't
nobody
a
hired.
privilege.
Yeah, yeah, that's, she also didn't get to socialize. She didn't get to,
Right.
interact with other kids and so on. So,
Yeah, and then she also kind of lets her have it. She's like, those kids don't like hate. That's not natural to them. They are taught to
and
hate.
and that's so true
Hmm.
throughout history,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she's also like, guess what? This country is changing and like you need to get with it. Like,
Yeah.
period. As Bob Dylan would say, you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone. For the times they are a changin'.
Change. I thought it was the answer's blown in the wind. God, I had the wrong song. Oh.
The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind.
Enter.
There's my Bob Dylan.
That's your Bob Dylan. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Miss Henry kind of lets Miss Woodmere have it and says all this stuff. And actually, and Miss Woodmere's like, well, you can leave. And she kind of leaves. And then this other teacher, Miss Spencer, is like, okay, but she's actually done like a really good job.
yeah.
She was here every day, like by herself, teaching this girl, and she put like her heart and soul into it. So like she deserves some respect. She's a great teacher. So I was like, good for you, Miss Spencer. You know what? You can't we weren't with you at the beginning, but you
But
came around.
yeah, exactly. Yep.
People
You
do have
saw
capacity for change,
church change.
for the
Exactly.
better.
Hmm.
Yeah. Like in social work, we would call this we're recovery oriented. That's more in terms of like mental illness and stuff like that people can get better. But like I think that I have that orientation for other parts of life too. Because,
Yeah.
I think people can change. Many people don't because change is like scary, right? It's
Sure.
easier to like live in
And it's
your
not
bubble.
easy.
It's not easy, right? Especially you've had this one way of thinking about things for your whole life and the people
Hmm.
around you think the same way and reinforce it.
Right.
But it's not forever. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean you can't think differently ever.
Right.
So,
Or that you can't listen at least to the other side of the discussion.
mhm. Mhm.
So
Yeah. Um, the and other people kind of start to come around too. So Ruby's friend's dad comes up to Ruby's dad and is like, we're actually all really, really proud of Ruby
mhm.
for what she's done. So they're kind of getting integrated back into the community, right? There's not this hostility anymore. Ruby tells Dr. Coles that Jimmy's nice to her now.
Yeah, Jimmy's come
Um,
around. He's
yeah.
not.
And she's like, I think that people are happier when they make friends. And he's like, I think you're right, Ruby. I think you're right. And it's cute. She's like, I'm gonna have a birthday party soon. Are you gonna come?
Oh,
He's
I
like,
know. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Wouldn't miss it. And then, at recess, all the other kids are on the little spinny thing,
Merry-go-round.
merry-go-round.
Carousel.
And
That's what we called it. We
okay.
called it the carousel. Yeah. Or
Okay, yeah. But
yeah.
people listening, it's the one that you have to like propel.
You got the little, it's
Somebody's
like the
gonna
round
run.
wheel thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And then you all sit on there and throw up.
spin. Yeah, or fall off.
Yeah. And all the other kids are on there, and then Ruby's like, and then they're like, come on over. And Miss Henry and Miss Spencer are sitting next to each other. Miss Spencer actually says directly to Miss Henry, like, that you've done a really good job and like what you've done with her is really great.
Hmm.
And just offering her compliments on her teaching. And she's like, like this, maybe there's, something here, right? Something's gonna come from this. So
Yeah.
obviously there's like a sort of happy ending. you at least things are on an upward
Well,
trajectory
it's good, yeah,
at the
because
end.
although we don't we don't know, or does it say at the end? I can't remember. Does it not? But like in the closing, is does Ruby continue to go to that school? I think after the first grade.
I am not totally sure. I know that she kept going to like public school
Okay,
in
in that
the community because she
community.
yeah, because she went to like an integrated high school there too, and she was still living in New Orleans like recently.
I think I would love to hear her talk about that time, about if, what she remembers, or, how maybe not so much what she remembers, but it remembers how she felt at that time. Cause I'm
Hmm.
sure that stayed with her all these years, um, about that one year, that first year, of, that experiment, or, that process.
Yeah, for sure. I think I know she does like speaking engagements and like there have been like museum exhibits about her and stuff like that. So I think that would be great. I know and they say on screen at the end that in 1995 she established the Ruby Bridges
Oh, I
Educational
forget.
Foundation
That's right. I did forget about that. Yeah, I did.
to kind of promote like, the value of tolerance and diversity and respect in public education, which I guess someone's gonna set on fire now. Like, how dare she say that?
But good for her for like doing something like that, because she could have just easily gone a different way.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
like my life sucked. I
Hmm.
had, I had to go to school with armed guards,
Hmm.
and she didn't,
Yeah. Well, after graduating from a desegregated high school, she worked as a travel agent for 15 years. And then she became a full-time parent. And then I guess she started the
Oh, okay.
foundation. It was like not, it was around the time that this movie came out because they said 1995, this movie came out in 98.
Oh, okay.
And I think she maybe evolved it a little bit after that. But
I wonder, did she go on
describing,
to higher education?
I don't think
uh,
so.
After high school? No,
Mm-mm.
just curious. So,
Describing the mission of the group of her foundation, she says, racism is a grown up disease, and we must stop using our children to spread it.
nice sentiment.
Yeah. This is interesting too. In 2010, Bridges had a 50th year reunion at the elementary school, which actually she was instrumental in keeping open because it was damaged in Hurricane Katrina.
Oh,
She was
really?
one of the people instrumental in, having it restored so it could
Ha- Be
still
open,
exist.
and still, still functioning as a.
Yeah. So she had a 50th year reunion at the elementary school with Pam Foreman Testroit, who was the first white child to break the boycott. So she was, I guess, the kid of that
Oh, of the
pastor.
minister,
Yeah.
the religious guy.
Hmm. So they had a reunion in 2010,
Nice.
which is I think was cute. But yeah, and then like the Obamas had displayed the painting at the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And so she got to go to the White House and they talked about it. And Barack Obama said, like, I think it's fair to say if it hadn't been for you guys, then like I wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be looking at this together.
Yeah, probably.
And so it was displayed there in 2011 for several months. I don't know.
When did Norman Rockwell paint the painting?
1964.
Okay.
So yeah, the painting was originally published as a centerfold in the January 14th, 1964 issue of Look.
Okay. Good for him
Um,
for, portraying a part of history.
yeah. After the work was published, Rockwell received sacks of disapproving mail, one letter accusing him of being a race traitor. That's so wild. It's like so crazy. If you just like acknowledge black people at all, you're a traitor to the white race. What does that even like mean?
Well, it's like
What
when
does
they
that mean?
called the minister a traitor. You're a
Yeah.
traitor. So it's like, really?
It's just like, what is like being white? It's really just like these people truly have like nothing else in their lives except for being white. Like that's the only thing that they think is good about them. They have nothing else to like hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, well, I have to. It's the same thing we were talking about, like being Gene Hackman's thing about his dad, like being better than somebody else. If
Right.
that's like the only
Me,
thing that you like have in your head, like, okay, well, me being white makes me better. I have literally nothing else going for me,
but at least
but
I'm
I gotta
white.
hang on to this.
But I'm
Yeah.
white.
It's like, how sad.
Yeah.
What a
I
sad
mean,
existence.
mm-hmm.
You've nothing, that's like, that's it. That's all you have to cling on to. And anyone who doesn't have to cling on to that is a traitor. They're not a person with like actual dreams and goals and abilities and like empathy and whatever.
Well, yeah, or the ability to, or the wherewithal to sit there and go, look, I know I'm not the only one that, that's struggling or whatever, or, there's other people who are struggling worse than I am, and then, I have to acknowledge that,
Right. It feels like people are like saying like you're betraying me by making me like think about the fact that like being white is not the best thing in the world, right? That like
hmm
that me being white is not like an accomplishment,
right. Uh,
right? Because
yeah,
if you say like, oh no, actually like black people are fine, then it's like, well then what do I have? And
right.
you're a
Yeah.
traitor for making me think about that.
Or make me feel like I, I think I'm pretty sure it was Chris Rock who, and I don't know if he still does it in one of his routine, his stand up routine, but he talked about racism and so on and so forth, and he would talk about as I think it was Chris Rock, and he said as much money as because Chris Rock's been in movies and stuff. He goes he said there are still white people who would not trade places with him, and he would say, and I'm rich,
Hmm.
he goes, and he's right. Unfortunately, that if you could trade places with me, but you'd have to be black. He goes, there are people who would not do that, and he said, and I'm rich. He
Yeah.
goes, I don't mean rich. He goes, I'm rich.
Exactly. Exactly. It's I read something someone said too, and it's sort of like the corollary to that of like there are people, and white people in particular, who would rather like, could be living in a tent under a bridge, but if it if everybody got a tent to live under the bridge, they would rather not have a tent if it meant the black person next to them also didn't have a tent. Because they don't like there are people that and it's the same I feel the way with like welfare, right? My grandmother's community in South Central Kentucky, rural Kentucky, everybody there is white and they are all on welfare.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are people that would rather, but in their mind, they're the Ronald Reagan welfare queen is that's who gets welfare, even though they also get welfare.
Uh-huh.
There are people, perhaps some of them, that would rather them also not have welfare if it means that lady doesn't have welfare.
Welfare.
They would give it up if it means she has to give it up.
That's so sad.
It's so sad.
It's so sad.
You're cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's like what if we all just were taken care of? Like I just it is that's why like I can't wrap my head around it. Like why someone else also being taken care of does not I'm not
It's
angry about it.
I know. I know.
And certainly, listen, I mean, also from my perspective, if I was a little kid going to school in 1960, my experience would be much more like Ruby Bridges' experience.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
times things do change from generation to generation. It was different times back then. Not, I'm 3 years younger, than
mhm.
Ruby. But growing up, like in a small town of West Virginia and so on and so forth. Back in the '60s, and we saw all this stuff on TV and stuff because it really didn't impact us personally because where I went to school, there was one guy who was black and his sister who was black that went to our school, and I don't know if it's because they were accepted as far as I knew. Everybody treated him, we all were friendly with him and stuff. Floyd Meadows, I'll never forget Floyd.
Mhm.
But maybe just because they didn't live in our neighborhood. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
we had a lot of small schools throughout the area. So like every little pocket of a community had a high school. It was like they consolidated later on, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason our schools were small. But anyway, but yeah, it wasn't until I got older, I went to college that, I actually, sat in classrooms with people from other races and other countries, like other backgrounds and other cultures. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
It's
different,
just wild.
just it was different, back then. I'm sure as it was, for you. You probably had much more exposure to other cultures and people of ethnic backgrounds than I did.
Mm-hmm.
Being and where you went to school and so on and so forth. So
Yeah.
hopefully that but I guess people, some people don't ever get educated or learn
Yeah.
from learn from that or take advantage of being exposed to other diverse cultures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. And it's interesting too. I watched part of Malcolm X yesterday, and
Such a
it
good movie.
yeah, it just made me think too of like the dad in this movie because he's like, I don't know that integration is like working here.
Yeah,
And it does, you could see why someone would go into sort of the like Marcus Garvey, like Malcolm X separatist direction.
yeah.
But yeah, this one I think it just really it I haven't watched it since I was a kid. This was the first time in decades that I had seen it, but I
Oh,
do
really?
still
Oh, okay.
yeah, like I watched it over and over like when I was like in
Oh, when
elementary
you were
school,
young. Okay, so
but not
not
since
recently.
then. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that but I like could still like relate to like my child self and like what appealed
I
to me
was
about
I
this
was going to say,
because
did it recall any of those early memories that you had when you first watched it?
yeah, yeah. I think it's just like a lot of just like the questions that come up, the questions that came up for Ruby were the same kind of questions that I had watching it as a kid. And it makes me happy that like my parents, you know, sat with me to watch this and engage with me about it
Mm-hmm.
because apparently not all parents would do that. And I think that's sad. It's like a disservice to your kid if you don't. But especially because like I don't know. And you know me, so like I'm the type of person who's really I have always asked a lot of questions as a kid. I'm generally a curious person because I want to like knowing things is important to me
Mm-hmm.
and like just understanding like what's going on. Because for me, it's like, well, why? That's sort of like my general orientation towards most things is like, yeah, but why?
Why? But
Is there like a logical reason for this? Because like racism, there is no logical reason. There's nothing logical about this. So I think just like asking questions and trying to be like, but like what? Like, what harms that lady so much about this
right.
little black girl going to
This
school?
right, yeah. What causes her so much anguish?
And the thing is, like, nothing, right? The answer is nothing. It's something like internal to her that is doing that.
Right.
And
I
so
mean,
I think,
it's nothing that you can see. It's not like, that this person is taking money away from her
right,
or,
there's
or,
no actual tangible harm coming
no,
to
no,
her,
there's no
but there is
physical.
like
Oh,
psychic harm coming to her that she is of like her own creation,
right. I was
of
going to
like
say,
her
yeah,
community's
it's not like
creation.
Ruby's like sending evil wave thoughts, but
Right.
yeah.
I
So,
would. I would just give her a look like, cursed. I'd do like the Sealy from
oh,
Color Purple curse. Until
okay.
you do right by me,
Right.
everything you touch. But Ruby was a nice, graceful child. And
Oh, yeah, very much so.
can't say that I would have,
Okay.
been graceful
All
like
right.
Ruby. But yeah, I think it's just like it is a pretty true to life depiction.
Well, and according to the source, it is very accurate.
Yeah.
You know,
So, you
if
know,
anybody would know, it'd be Ruby.
yeah.
So,
So I think, I encourage people, especially if you have kids, to watch it with them. It's on Disney Plus. It's an hour and a half long.
I-
So
yeah,
it
and
moves very quickly.
it moves very quickly. I was going. It's not slow. It's not stagnant. And I made reference to the production values. It's well done. It's
Hmm.
the cast is very good. And I think all the portrayals, like I said, are very good, especially the actor who plays Ruby, and
Yeah, and she
and
didn't really, her name's Chaz Monet. It doesn't appear that she really did much else.
I don't
So,
see her listed anywhere in anything else. And I look because I want to think, did she ever go on to become, an actor, later in life? But I never
mhm.
saw anything after this. Did you?
Yeah. No, no.
So,
I think I may
and
have seen like one other or two other things like at like this time.
oh, okay. So
Like she
maybe
maybe did
around
another thing as like a child, but she didn't like continue
probably
acting.
another ABC after school
Right,
special.
another like TV
Mom, do I
movie or
need
something.
braces? Mom, I
But
have to have glasses. Why are kids making
yes.
fun of me? So,
But yeah, I think it's a good it's good like for a TV movie. I think it's impactful. I think that
oh
it's
gosh, yeah.
especially if you can sort of watch it through the eyes of a kid. I think like I said, it the some of the images in this movie are like burned into my brain from when I was 7 years old. The coffin and the poison, the lady telling her she's going to poison her. Like those things. And there's a reason why like that Norman Rockwell painting is famous. Like it's because it really like captures a moment in history that is like sort of scary but also kind of like triumphant and says something about like who we are and who this little girl is and
Well,
yeah.
and if I'm not mistaken, is the painting, the picture, it just shows it's Ruby, but it's only the legs of the marshals, correct? It's
Yeah. So it's like
so you
her body is taking up like the whole thing, but obviously they're much taller, so you
right,
cannot
but
see.
but I mean, I think in that depiction, it's like they're faceless,
Yes.
but Ruby is the prime is the
Hmm.
focus of the picture, and I think that says a lot, especially that it was done not at 4 years after the fact, but even still during that time period. And maybe I don't know, maybe it had something to do with the civil rights movement really sort of began in earnest or was in full
Hmm.
bloom in 64, after President Johnson had taken office.
Mm.
So you talked about seeing this from your perspective as a young child at that age. For me, it's part of my history.
Hmm.
I was granted I was only 3 years old, but I was alive at this time. It's part of my
Yeah.
history. So you're right. It's not ancient history, but it is. We're going back 60 years. 65 years,
Hmm.
and so people of my age or around my age then look at it from our perspective. If you all haven't seen this, and look at it and think this was happening while we were still, when we were, getting ready to get you're ready to go to school, like
Hmm.
Ruby was. So
Hmm. Yeah. And I say like I think sometimes people younger than me think about this era as being very remote, right? Like the Civil War,
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
and it's
Or like,
not.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
Ruby Bridges is 70 years old. That's not that old.
no, no,
Like,
no, no, as like I said, the fact that you could still talk to the person that this was about,
hmm.
It'd be like if you could talk to Martin Luther King or,
Right.
Rosa Parks or, any of the other, leaders. And
Hmm.
was Ruby Bridges a civil rights leader? No, but she played a very important part in it, don't you think? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
and I never thought of that until you brought this to my attention.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
I didn't even know that that was a real person, honest to goodness, in the picture. That I
Hmm.
just thought it was a depiction of just like a generalization, in
Yeah.
all honesty, that it was, a child who was being sent to an all white school during this, desegregation period. I
Hmm.
had no idea that it was really, that it was really Ruby Bridges.
Yeah.
So, so, again, thank you for selecting it. I always like watching movies that I haven't seen before, particularly ones
Hmm.
that have an impact. And this one really did. I really enjoyed this movie. Both for its for being a movie. It was it was informative. It was entertaining, but also that it brings that all that a little bit more into perspective to me.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's cool too. Like I was when I was reading about Ruby Bridges, there was also probably like 10 years or so ago at the Indianapolis Children's Museum, there was an exhibit about like children making an impact. And so it was
Hmm.
her, Anne Frank, and
Mm.
Ryan White, who was like one of the first like kids to have
Yeah, the
HIV AIDS,
HIV. Yeah.
which sort of brought it to a different level of like attention. But I think that's the other kind of like cool thing watching it as a kid. Obviously, it was like very scary and sad, but there is this sense of like, even being a kid, you can be impactful,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there are kids throughout history who have done things, and she's technically just going to school, right? Like, thing I do, we were doing every day, but navigating a situation that did like have a real impact.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and I think there is something kind of cool about that as a kid to be
Sure.
like, "Oh, like I think that was also part of what appealed to me as a kid cuz I kind of was like the idea of sort of like doing something important or special was like appealed to me a lot. So I think seeing that like okay, you can, and even if it doesn't feel like it, right? Cuz maybe for her, right, she's just like, "Okay, well, I'm going to school and for me going to school means
Yeah.
walking with some US Marshals." It still can like mean something, right? Like Anne Frank writing, she's just like, I'm just writing in my diary, right? But it looking back
So
historically,
we're
right?
still
Like,
talking about it. Yeah.
right. And same with like Ryan White, like he didn't like do anything, but
Suffer from a horrible
yeah.
disease, and then,
But
consequently.
I think it's just showing that like being a kid doesn't mean that you can't like be impactful. And that
Exactly.
that I think was really
I
like
think that's a great,
powerful to me too.
very good point. Yeah. The age or yeah, or experience or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have an impact on people
Hmm.
or society.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So, well, I think that's that for Ruby Bridges. I really do encourage people, especially if you have kids, just check it out. Even if you don't have kids, check it out.
yeah.
But I think, especially if you have kids, I think it's an interesting thing for them to see. Because, like I said, I will say it again, if Ruby Bridges at 6 could go through it, your kid can watch it. um, I promise they might have some questions, but I have faith that you can navigate it. Please, wherever you're listening to this, subscribe so you can get all of our episodes every Monday. We're trying to stay on kind of Black History Month theme this month, doing some movies that sort of relate to issues related to racism, stuff like that. You can rate, review, leave a comment, but only if it's nice, or else we're going to rap you on the knuckles with a ruler, like that little girl that goes to private school. Like those mean nuns.
Mean nuns. Yeah. Yeah. Don't, yeah. At least Ruby didn't get her hands wrapped.
Yeah. Small victories. Please be sure to follow us on Instagram at Some of Our Parts Pod. You can see all the movies that we've talked about. We are nearing 50, so there's a bunch you can check out. Some of the episodes even cover more than one. We post little previews of what's coming up and whatever else comes up that we want to share. And with that, bye bye.
Take care.